full beans. Ooh, that's nice. A lot of people might think that starting up a car company is a crazy idea. Just ask Elon Musk. It isn't cheap. It takes a lot more time and effort than most people could possibly imagine. And guess who the guy was responsible for the chief design work on the Tesla Model S? None other than Peter Rawlinson, who just so happens to be the CEO and Chief Technical Officer of Lucid Car Company. So after his successes at Tesla, apparently he was still hungry for more. He decided that he still had more to offer. And Lucid decided that what they wanted to do was to start from a completely clean sheet and reimagine just exactly what the electric car could be. We're going to take a deep look into this today, the Lucid Air Dream, the first of its kind, and see exactly what Generation 2 of the electric car might look like. The Lucid Air Dream is their first entrance to market, and as such they've decided to hit the ground at the top to begin with. It's a performance model, and the sticker price is $175,000, but there's only a limited number of these to begin with, 520. Why? Because 520 is the optimal mile range of this vehicle. So in case you're a regular viewer and you're thinking, okay, Brian, well, it's a limited run vehicle, that's great, it's a concept, but what does that have to do with me? The answer is that in order to establish everything that needs completely redesigning from scratch, it makes the most sense to start at the top in order to provide all of the tech you need for then coming down to mass market appeal further on. So the Lucid Air range is supposed to expand way beyond this. Well, this is officially the first car to break the 500-mile barrier. And if all of that sounds like a lot of, yeah, okay, on a test track with a backwind, with the right direction happening, no, that's a very realistic figure. Now, this is the performance model. So this car, as it stands here right now, is capable of delivering 452 miles of range. And that's not crazy fantasy. We have taken this out for extensive driving today, and I can say that even playing with it and having a lot of fun, you can still expect a realistic range of 400 miles. So how did they do it? Well, come on, let's take a closer look and find out. So let's start round at the front of this car. And I think naysayers or people who like a bit more flair and dynamism might take their first look at the Lucid and say, well, doesn't it look a little bit kind of, I don't know, plain? Well, there's a lot of story behind that. First of all, you have to consider that the way that this car was designed was always going to be function over form to begin with. The function dictates the form. So this car has a drag coefficient of 0.2, and a lot of technology had to go into achieving that. But in redesigning and reimagining exactly what's possible, they've also changed the entire architecture of how they think about the car. Sound dramatic? Well, just consider this light array at the front. In order to achieve this, which crushes the entire front area here and massively positively influences not only the aerodynamicism of the car, but also the available storage in the front, they had to completely redesign the way that headlights work. These air intakes suck air in off the road and then actually create twin tornado effects directly behind the bumper on either side. And the reason they've done that is because the radiator, rather than having one standard radiator approach, has been split into two. It's either side of this bumper, and by creating a vortices of this air behind it, they're able to hit the entire area of that radiator all at once. Now that maximizes the cooling potential instead of focusing the air draw only on one specific area. And in doing that, they not only increase the efficiency of the cooling, but they also maximize the potential load space of the front. You can see another way in which the aerodynamics have been so inventively approached just here. There's a buildup of pressure that is created just here on the front edge of the car. So there's actually a channel here through which the air can come. And then if you look slightly higher up on the bonnet, this is where that air is pushed. And it comes right through the bonnet, right up, forcing that air down the side flank of the vehicle. 4.97 meters or 196 inches in length. I think it's a really great mix of both those big, bold, impressive flanks, but also the modern of the new. Just look at this roof. This is one piece of glass that stretches all the way back to here, and then more glass coming through. So an entirely glass canopy. And in order to make that work, only aluminium has been used elsewhere on the chassis, giving it the strength and the light weight that it needs in order to provide the performance that it provides. I like greatly, for example, this light blade that runs the entire length of the boot, and the styling choice they made to make the boot one piece. So if you have a look here, there's no seam because the boot runs all the way round into the side. And that's going to do two things: give you a massive opening when we open this up, we'll take a look in a little bit, but also stylistically make sure that there's no interruption to this line that comes right the way through. Speaking of boots, let's take a look inside this one and see just how much available space there is at the rear. Well, 626 litres of load. And if you're struggling to see back there because of the black, let me flip down one of the seats so you can get a little bit of light through, just to get a sense. As you can see, you have rather a lot of room in this boot, plenty enough room for two decent sized suitcases. You also have a 60-40 split on the rear seats and a ski hatch back here to fit your skis. There is a further storage area underneath here, which is going to be perfect for cables and any ancillaries. Sadly, we've gone through the age when people think it's necessary to put spare tires in cars. Still not completely convinced about that, but I guess that is the way that the industry's going. And nice storage bins either side to drop down even more things that you might want to store. Here I think we have a bespoke bag that's ready to receive all of the charging cables. This could be one of those takes where I stand here for about an hour. You can also open the front using the key. Let's take a look at that. Again, please make some allowance for the fact it's pre-production, so they work a little bit better than this. Now this is really one of the most obvious statements of where all of that space saving that took place within the front bumper design has really paid off. I don't know if you've taken the chance to see our reviews of either the Taycan S or recently the Mercedes. If not, then please check them out. We'll link to them below. But this, by anybody's standards, is a very large frunk. When you look at the opening aperture here, you think, well, that's not so impressive. I mean, it's pretty good, but it's not endless. But that's before you've had a look down here at the storage bin. Just look at this available space. It's huge. All right, well, I've played with the key for a bit now, so I hope I won't embarrass myself quite so much. Two quick squeezes of the key. There we are, and the car is unlocked. And as you can see, the visual cue to tell you that that's going on is that these handles have raised prominently so you can gain access to the vehicle. As you do that, and you open it up, you get your first glimpse into the cabin. And right from the start, you can see this mix of very high quality materials on the door. I'm 5'10" in height, or 178 centimeters. And as you can see, even though I have a particularly long torso, there is plenty of room left available for me thanks to this glass roof. What you're looking at here is a 32-inch 5K display. And if that's ringing your bells and thinking, that just reminds me of something, to me, it does look a little bit reminiscent of the Taycan. I have to be honest, I think I prefer their execution slightly, but they have had a bit more practice, in fairness. Sorry, Lucid, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? But I just like the way that that sits together. This looks different to me, and the reason I think I find that a little jarring is I'm just not quite sure immediately what's here for me to interact with in a tactile way and what's here for purely visual purposes. Now that has been in some way signposted for me by this segmentation. As you can see, this middle section here is the effective driver's display. Now Lucid have said that they wanted to make a decision, at least at launch, to really have a fairly sparse offering in terms of what the driver actually sees. They want the focus to remain on the road, They don't want too much extraneous information here. I'm a huge fan in my life of head-up displays. They decided not to put one in here, even though there is the space within the dashboard to fit one. And the reason is they just wanted to keep this simple, uncluttered, and only contain the information you need. And I think that's nicely presented. You could say it's a little bit dull, that's personal taste, but I think the opposite can be true, that it's a little bit challenging to have far too much information available to you, and that seems to be a growing trend within driver cockpits. So honestly, I'm a bit relieved just to find a display that only tells you what you need to know. If I drag down from here, it seamlessly goes straight into the middle section here, which means the passenger can check out any music they want without interfering with your line of sight. That's a pretty neat trick. This is also a pretty neat trick. Push this button right here. And the central display disappears into the dashboard, which shows you up this large storage bin right underneath it. That's a smart use of space. I don't think you need to get in there all the time. It's nice that it's available, and it's nice to get that out of the way sometimes. And if we want to get it back, we push on the same arrow and back it comes. This is going to be your standard welcome screen, and this is the most important feature that you're standardly going to want to access. This is where the drive modes are located. Now, I would have much preferred a physical button for this, but in fairness to Lucid, when you actually start driving this car, as you can see from my arm length, it's very natural to switch between these modes without actually needing to think about it too much. The thing that's a little bit less obvious is if I want to change the level of regeneration, I have to push and hold and then change like that. Now, that's obviously something that you're not going to be that enthusiastic about messing around with while you're driving. I think that's something that they're going to be looking at a little bit later on in terms of a later software iteration and how they want to develop things. Little quirky feature is this button here for the glove box. Push that and it opens. Well, that's quite a nice touch. Steering wheel's a bit of an odd one for me. I like the shape and the position is good, and this approach to styling not only looks nice, but it feels good too. The bit that I have a problem with is the diameter of this steering wheel. My favorite steering wheel ever is the Porsche Taycan, which is not an original steering wheel. It's used on lots of other Porsches, but it's tight and it's responsive and it's slim, and that's really important because it's a performance car and it needs to be agile, so the steering has to reflect that. Now, here in this car, you have tight, responsive steering, but this to me is a very large diameter steering wheel. Well, the back is really the big story of this car. Wow, it's cavernous. Now, this car has a 22 unit battery pack, and that's really important because that's there to maximize the range. You can also get the lower editions of this car with an 18 unit battery pack. Now, that does obviously impact on the total range, but as the overall total range of this vehicle is so incredibly impressive, it's not going to bother most people, but it is going to make a big difference to what happens back here, because this is the area in which the battery packs are removed from if you don't have the extra ones. And that creates an extra depth available for feet of around about that. And that really changes the comfort back here. Now, this is nice, and as you can see, I have acres of space. This seat in front is set for me, and I have very short legs. So it's a much fairer comparison if I slide over and show you how much room there is when the seat is set for a normal human being. But look at that. That's crazy amounts of room. You really can sit three people back here in the most comfort. And for an electric car, especially one that really isn't terribly long, that's a very big achievement. But not only that, if the camera comes round and you have a look at my head, because I have all of this leg room, I'm free to sink down into that seat slightly, and really pleasingly, despite that coupe line, all of the materials are finished with just as much care and attention in the back as they are in the front. Of course, you have your own heating and cooling controls. You have a nice storage area back here. It really does feel like you are sitting in a premium car. And given that this is their first attempt at doing this, you have to be impressed with what they've achieved. Sticking with that theme of comfort, when you want to gain entry to the rear doors, you might standardly expect that that's as much room as you're going to have. Well, a 90-degree opening on the rear door here. So look how easy that is to gain and access to and exit from. Combine that with the self-closing door. It's really quite hard to see how you could have an awful lot more comfort back there. The battery pack provides 118 kilowatt hours and over 300 watt charging. Now, one of the smartest things, in my opinion, that Lucid achieved when they designed this car was to make their charging port universally accessible. And what that means is whatever the charging situation you have available for this car is, you will be able to access it. And that's thanks to a very clever unit that sits within the car, which they've called a Wunderbox or Wonderbox. And that has not only the battery management system, but also power inverter system, which allows you not only to put power in, but also take power out. So further down the route as the technology develops, you'll also be able to use this as an energy sink for your house. That's a pretty bold statement, but given the rising cost of energy, that's actually quite an appealing prospect. We managed to find a nice bit of almost open road out amongst the redwoods just outside of San Francisco. Sadly not the giant redwoods, but probably it's a bit harder to drive at speed around there anyway. Obviously there are speed restrictions here, but what we do have lots of are really nice windy roads, and that's an excellent place to just get a feel for how good the handling of this car is. So it's not a light car, it's over 2,000 kilos or over 5,000 pounds in weight. And when you start throwing it around, although you can feel that weight, what you get more than anything else is a deep sense of being impressed about how all of these components are put together in order to provide torsional stiffness to the whole way the car sits. One of the things the designers told us, which I guess is pretty obvious but still pretty cool, is that the advantage of electric cars over internal combustion engines, because they don't need to fit any components underneath, you really can create a perfect environment underneath the car for the flow of air. So a completely flat plane. But one of the things that's particularly impressive about the bottom of this car is apparently that isn't an optimal aerodynamic environment. What you want is a slight bow at the bottom to create the lift where you want it, the downforce where you don't. When you put your foot down and throw this car around a corner, it feels entirely intentional and so much fun. I don't feel as if I need to put any effort into this at all. And bluntly, I feel like I could go at least twice as fast as this without in any way being bothered about it. To switch those modes, but this is swift, look at that. A more dynamic driving stance on the road, steering's more responsive. Still, absolutely nothing to worry about at all. The car feels so within the bounds of what it's comfortable to do. So I'm a bit disappointed that currently the Lucid only has those two states, but I'm more disappointed that currently if you want to change that state, you have to do it through this digital display. Well, I hope this gets captured by the middle camera, but I want you to see what that means. As you've already gathered, I can change these modes with only a cursory glance. I can't do that with a regeneration. If I push down on this, you hopefully will be able to see that the braking option comes up. Now, I've already spent too long looking at this display to make me comfortable, and as hopefully you can see, that option has now gone away because I didn't respond quickly enough. What does that mean in the real world? This is on high regeneration. I'm currently driving 60 miles an hour. If I take my foot off, that deceleration is all recuperation. This, by the way, is the acceleration that you experience with Swift. Nice. So not quite the full beans, but I think enough for most people on a regular day. Certainly enough for a road in these conditions, but you didn't tune in to watch standard, boring, everyday driving. So what happens if we want the full beans? Well, first of all, we've got to hit the sprint button, and then in order to make absolutely sure that's what we meant, as is fairly common to other manufacturers, we click on confirm. So now I'm in sprint. and full beans. Ooh, that's nice. Obviously, that's what you're going to get in Sprint. Now, as I said, I don't think you're going to be using that every 2 minutes, but the cooling architecture of this car means that in total difference to many other electric performance vehicles, you should be able to do that again and again and again and again. And that's really important. Not because I think you're going to want to do it, but you're going to want to feel that you could if you did. Once you start putting this car into a crosswind, the noise from the wind is actually quite significant. And this road surface is good, but once you start driving on a little rough road surface, there's a fair amount of cabin noise from that too. So it isn't without issue on the wind front. Am I maybe imagining that some of that has to do with all glass and no insulation in the ceiling? Maybe. Is that fair? Maybe, maybe not. So far, my takeaways from the driving experience. Excellent seating position, excellent seat. Steering, really precise and nice, let down badly by a spongy, massive feeling steering wheel. So, driver's instruments, further hurt by 2 short stalks that are awkward for me to operate with my tiny, tiny hands. Braking, well, you don't really need to get into worrying about that too much with excellent recuperation, but I would have preferred to have had more modes of that to offer me more flexibility. Overall, I can tell you that this car really doesn't show you what it's got until you start pushing it. And that's when everything comes together beautifully. So I think they've done an awful lot at answering all of the problems people have with the concept of electric vehicles overall, but that doesn't really address the central question of any car, which is yes, but is it any fun to drive? Yes, yes, and yes is my answer. Am I getting as big of a kick out of this as I get off the Taycan? No. Do I think this is as practical? It's a lot more practical. I'm definitely going to feel better driving my family around in this. I also don't think that it's going to get egged when I leave it in a supermarket car park for looking too expensive or being too cool. I think it's an immense amount of car for the proposition, but more than all of that, I don't see Porsche being able to bring an affordable product to market anytime soon. And this, I think, is going to be incredibly viable to normal people within a comparatively short space of time. Why? Because they already invested all of the money they needed to in making a product that works. That means when you want to make it cheaper, you already spent the money. That means you don't have to recoup as much of the spend in the sales price of the vehicle itself. So I'm incredibly optimistic about this vehicle to deliver real value over the long term, not only for the company, but also for the people who purchased this car.